Hi everyone, today's Thursday and it's time for your Last Tuck Everlasting video of the week. Today we are going to read chapters 5 and 6 together and go ahead and do our notes page for 5 and 6. We're also going to look at this next page, predicting. That's on the back of the 5 and 6 notes. But we'll get to all that in just a little bit. Before we read today, I want you to find your vocabulary, whatever that looks like for you, if you still have it as a whole piece of paper or maybe you cut it apart. I want you first for class today to review your vocabulary one more time. And then when you're ready, put this away, put your vocab away, and pause me for a little bit. Go to Miss Pennington and she will give you your vocab quiz for today. And then you can turn that into the trays at the back of the room by the sink, okay? And she'll bring those to me in a safe way after school today, and I'll get them graded for you, okay? If you are virtual, your vocab quiz is in Teams under assignments, and so you can take that on your iPad and then submit that back to me, please, okay? So review one more time. Put your vocab away and pause me when you're ready and go get your vocab quiz from Miss Pennington or take it on Teams under your assignments, okay? Okay, welcome back. Hope your vocab quiz went well. We are going to read chapters 5 and 6 today and do our notes for those chapters. So everybody find your pencil and your novel and your notes page, and let's go ahead and get started. So today in our notes page, we are going to do this vocabulary box. We'll come back to it and do it last today, actually. And then, there you go. And then we're going to do these 4 boxes. This top box here and this one here are for chapter 5. So let's go ahead and read those 2 questions, and so we know what to look for as we're reading, and then I'll read chapter 5. So our first box that we want to look for today: what 2 reasons did Winnie have for not running away? Okay, what 2 reasons do we hear today that she had, that she gave, that she didn't want to run away? And then the second box says, describe what Winnie saw in the woods. That makes me think that she decides to go to the woods. Remember how she had been feeling cooped up and scared? Maybe she's becoming a little more brave, and today she decides to go at least in the woods and look around, okay? So we're going to look for those 2 things. Everybody go to chapter 5. We're on page 22, and I'm going to read chapter 5. Winnie woke early next morning. The sun was only just opening its own eye on the eastern horizon, and the cottage was full of silence. There's a really good personification there. The sun was opening its eye. That's good personification. But she realized that sometime during the night she had made up her mind. She would not run away today. Where would I go anyway? She asked herself. There's nowhere else I really want to be. But in another part of her head, the darkest part where her oldest fears were housed, she knew there was another sort of reason for staying at home. She was afraid to go away alone. Okay, I'm going to stop there because we can answer our first question. So the question in our notes said, what 2 reasons did Winnie have for not running away? Well, we just read them. Her first reason on page 22 in that first paragraph, she said, where would I go anyway? So let's write down, she doesn't know where she would go. She doesn't know where she would go. Okay, and did you hear the second reason she had for not running away today? It said she was afraid to go away alone. So she was scared. Remember, she's a little girl and she's never really been anywhere. So it would be frightening for her to go somewhere all by herself. So we can write that as she would be afraid to go alone. Okay. All right, I'm going to show you what I wrote down, and you can pause me if you need to write what I wrote. So I said, she doesn't know where she would go, and she would be afraid to go alone. That's why she decided not to run away today. Remember, she was thinking, she even told the toad, maybe I'll do it in the morning while everyone's still asleep. Well, now we know she's decided to not run away, at least for today, okay? All right, I'm going to continue reading. I'm on the second paragraph on page 22. It was one thing to talk about being by yourself, doing important things, but quite another when the opportunity arose. The characters in the stories she read always seemed to go off without a thought or care. But in real life, well, the world was a dangerous place. People were always telling her so, and she would not be able to manage without protection. They were always telling her that, too. No one ever said precisely what it was that she would not be able to manage, but she did not need to ask. Her own imagination supplied the horrors. Still, it was galling, remember galling means annoying, that this having to admit she was afraid. And when she remembered the toad, she felt even more disheartened. What if the toad should be out by the fence again today? What if he should laugh at her secretly and think she was a coward? Well, anyway, she could at least slip out, right now, she decided, and go into the wood to see if she could discover what had really made the music the night before. That would be something anyway. She did not allow herself to consider the idea that making a difference in the world might require a bolder venture. She merely told herself consolingly, of course, while I'm in the wood, if I decide never to come back, well, then that will be that. She was able to believe in this because she needed to, and believing was her own true, promising friend once more. So she is going to go into the woods. She's going to go look around. She has that much courage, and if she decides not to come back, well, then that will be that. She'll decide not to come back. So she is going to go look around now. It was another heavy morning, already hot and breathless, but in the wood the air was cooler and smelled agreeably damp. Winnie had been no more than 2 slow minutes walking timidly under the interlacing branches when she wondered why she had never come here before. Why, it's nice, she thought with great surprise. For the wood was full of light, entirely different from the light she was used to. It was green and amber and alive, quivering in splotches on the padded ground, fanning into sturdy stripes between the tree trunks. There were little flowers she did not recognize, white and palest blue, and endless tangled vines, and here and there a fallen log, half rotted but soft with patches of sweet green velvet moss. And there were creatures everywhere. The air fairly hummed with their daybreak activity, beetles and birds and squirrels and ants and countless other things unseen, all gentle and self-absorbed and not in the least alarming. There was even, she saw with satisfaction, the toad. It was squatting on a low stump, and she might not have noticed it, for it looked more like a mushroom than a living creature sitting there. As she came abreast of it, however, it blinked, and the movement gave it away. "See," she exclaimed, "I told you I'd be here first thing in the morning." The toad blinked again and nodded, or perhaps it was only swallowing a fly. But then it nudged itself off the edge of the stump and vanished in the underbrush. "It must have been watching for me," said Winnie to herself, and was very glad she had come. She wandered for a long time, looking at everything, listening to everything, proud to forget the tight, pruned world outside, humming a little now, trying to remember the pattern of the melody she had heard the night before. And then up ahead, in a place where the light seemed brighter and the ground somewhat more open, something moved. Winnie stopped abruptly and crouched down. "If it's really elves," she thought, "I can have a look at them." And though her instinct was to turn and run, she was pleased to discover that her curiosity was stronger. She began to creep forward. She would go just close enough, she told herself, just close enough to see, and then she would turn and run. But when she came near, up behind a sheltering tree trunk, and peered around it, her mouth dropped open and all thought of running melted away. There was a clearing directly in front of her, at the center of which an enormous tree thrust up, its thick roots rumpling the ground 10 feet around in every direction. Sitting relaxed with his back against the trunk was a boy, almost a man, and he seemed so glorious to Winnie that she lost her heart at once. He was thin and sunburned, this wonderful boy, with a thick mop of curly brown hair, and he wore his battered trousers and loose grubby shirt with as much self-assurance as if they were silk and satin. A pair of green suspenders, more decorative than useful, gave the finishing touch, for he was shoeless, and there was a twig tucked between the toes of one foot. He waved the twig idly as he sat there, his face turned up to gaze at the branches far above him. The golden morning light seemed to glow all around him, while brighter patches fell, now on his lean brown hands, now on his hair and face, as the leaves stirred over his head. Then he rubbed an ear carelessly, yawned, and stretched. Shifting his position, he turned his attention to a little pile of pebbles next to him. As Winnie watched, scarcely breathing, he moved the pile carefully to one side, pebble by pebble. Beneath the pile, the ground was shiny wet. The boy lifted a final stone, and Winnie saw a low spurt of water arching up and returning like a fountain into the ground. He bent and put his lips to the spurt, drinking noiselessly, and then he sat up again and drew his shirt sleeve across his mouth. As he did this, he turned his face in her direction, and their eyes met. For a long moment they looked at each other in silence, the boy with his arms still raised to his mouth. Neither of them moved. At last his arm fell to his side. "You may as well come out," he said with a frown. Winnie stood up, embarrassed, and because of that, resentful. "I didn't mean to watch you," she protested as she stepped into the clearing. "I didn't know anyone would be here." The boy eyed her as she came forward. "What are you doing here?" he asked her sternly. "It's my wood," said Winnie, surprised by the question. "I can come here whenever I want to. At least, I was never here before, but I could have come any time." "Oh," said the boy, relaxing a little. "You're one of the Fosters, then." "I'm Winnie," she said. "Who are you?" "I'm Jessie Tuck," he answered. "How do?" And he put out a hand. Winnie took his hand, staring at him. He was even more beautiful up close. "Do you live nearby?" she managed at last, letting go of his hand reluctantly. "I never saw you before. Do you come here a lot?" "No one's supposed to. It's our wood." Then she added quickly, "It's all right, though, if you come here. I mean, it's all right with me." The boy grinned. "No, I don't live nearby. And no, I don't come here often. Just passing through. And thanks, I'm glad it's all right with you." "That's good," said Winnie irrelevantly. She stepped back and sat down primly a short distance from him. "How old are you anyway?" she asked, squinting at him. There was a pause. At last he said, "Why do you want to know?" "I just wondered," said Winnie. "All right. I'm 104 years old," he told her solemnly. "No, I mean really," she persisted. "Well then," he said, "if you must know, I'm 17. 17? That's right." "Oh," said Winnie hopelessly. 17. That's old." "You have no idea," he agreed with a nod. Winnie had the feeling he was laughing at her, but decided it was a nice kind of laughing. "Are you married?" she asked next. This time he laughed out loud. "No, I'm not married. Are you?" Now it was Winnie's turn to laugh. "Of course not," she said. "I'm only 10. I'll be 11 pretty soon." "And then you'll get married?" he suggested. Winnie laughed again, her head on one side, admiring him. and then she pointed to the spurt of water. "Is that good to drink?" she asked. "I'm thirsty." Jessie Tuck's face was instantly serious. "Oh, that? No, it's not," he said quickly. "You mustn't drink from it. Comes right up out of the ground. Probably pretty dirty." And he began to pile the pebbles over it again. "But you drank some," Winnie reminded him. "Oh, did you see that?" He looked at her anxiously. "Well, me, I'll drink anything. I mean, I'm used to it. It wouldn't be good for you, though." "Why not?" said Winnie. She stood up. "It's mine anyway, if it's in the wood. I want some. I'm about dry as dust." And she went to where he sat and knelt down beside the pile of pebbles. "Believe me, Winnie Foster," said Jessie, "it would be terrible for you if you drank any of this water. Just terrible. I can't let you." "Well, I still don't see why not," said Winnie plaintively. "I'm getting thirstier every minute. If it didn't hurt you, it won't hurt me. If my papa was here, he'd let me have some." "You're not going to tell him about it, are you?" said Jessie. His face had gone very pale under its sunburn. He stood up and put a bare foot firmly on the pile of pebbles. "I knew this would happen sooner or later. Now what am I going to do?" And as he said this, there was a crashing sound among the trees, and a voice called, "Jessie!" "Thank goodness," said Jessie, blowing out his cheeks in relief. "Here comes Ma and Miles. They'll know what to do." And sure enough, a big, comfortable-looking woman appeared, leading a fat old horse. And at her side was a young man almost as beautiful as Jessie. It was May Tuck with her other son, Jessie's older brother. And at once, when she saw the two of them, Jessie with his foot on the pile of pebbles, and Winnie on her knees beside him, she seemed to understand. Her hand flew to her bosom, grasping at the old brooch that fastened her shawl, and her face went bleak. "Well, boys," she said, "here it is. The worst is happening at last." Ooh, I wonder what it is that's happening. What's so terrible that's happening at last? Okay. Ooh, lots of clues in our story today. Hey, we finally find out how old Winnie is. She's 10. You're probably your age, and she's about to be 11. So if she went to school at Baker, she'd probably be a 5th grader with you guys. So she's young. She's a little girl. Okay. Ooh, lots happened in this chapter. Oh, I just realized I spelled a word wrong. She doesn't know where she would go. Caught my mistake. Okay, so here we are. We finished up this box. We're going to come back and do vocab last. Let's go right here to this box. Describe what Winnie saw in the woods. She saw lots of things in the woods. Let's make a list. Let's make us a bulleted list like this. We'll put a dot right there, and we'll kind of make us a list all the way down, okay? Let's list some of the things that Winnie saw. So when she first got to the woods, she saw lots of bugs and squirrels and creatures. So we can say animals and creatures. Animals and creatures. Okay. There was lots of light, so sunlight. Okay. She also saw a big tree, like a very tall tree. Okay. And what do you think is the most important thing she saw? Right, Jessie Tuck. She saw a boy, comma, Jessie Tuck. Okay, and when she saw Jessie Tuck, what was he doing? He was drinking from a little water spurt coming out of the ground. So that's what I'm going to call it. It was just like a little tiny fountain coming out of the ground. Water spurt out of the ground. Okay, I'm going to stop there because that's plenty. Okay, let me hold this up for you, and you can pause me if you need to and make your list. She saw animals and creatures, sunlight, a very tall tree. She saw a boy, Jesse Tuck, and she saw a water spurt out of the ground. One more thing. Do you remember what else she saw that she had seen at her house the day before? Right. She saw the toad. Okay, so I just added the toad to my list there. All right, pause me if you need to so you can finish up your list. Okay. Okay, I just want to flip through really quickly in chapter 5 and make sure I don't miss anything, point out anything. When I get back next week, we're going to spend some time looking through what we've read so far for examples of figurative language. This chapter in particular had quite a bit of personification. It had a couple of metaphors, and there's even an alliteration in this chapter. I wonder if anybody caught the alliteration. Remember, alliteration is whenever the beginning sound of a string of words, like in a sentence, are the same, like a tongue twister. There's a good example of alliteration here. But we'll talk about figurative language next week. But right now, as far as characters and setting, I just want to point out a couple of things. First of all, I love how when Winnie sees Jesse, the author says she lost her heart at once. That means she basically fell in love with him as soon as she saw him. He was just gorgeous to her. He has like curly, messy brown hair, and he has on overalls and kind of a messy shirt, and he doesn't even have shoes on. But she says several times he was just so beautiful, so good looking to her that she, like, it took her breath away how handsome he was. And so it says she lost her heart at once. She kind of fell in love with him right when she saw him. So when she's talking to him, it's almost like she's a little bit embarrassed to talk to such a boy who is so cute. We find out that Jesse says, first he says, I'm 104 years old. That's curious, isn't it? But then he comes back and says, oh, I'm 17. So he's older. Winnie, we find out, is 10, almost 11. So they're about 7 years apart. And then she wants to get a drink from the water, and Jesse won't let her. So right there, we automatically have some kind of curious problem to solve. So we have characters, we have setting, now we have a problem. We don't know why Jesse won't let her drink from the water, but he's pretty adamant, pretty set on not letting her have a drink from the water. Okay, and then at the very end of that chapter, May, remember we met May from a few chapters ago, and the other brother, Miles, who is Jesse's older brother, come running through the woods, and May says, the worst is happening at last. So I wonder what it is that's so bad that May has to say that as soon as she sees Winnie in the woods. Okay, all right, let's go on and read chapter 6 and do our notes for that, okay? So for chapter 6, turn my book over. So for chapter 6, we have two questions here. This one, how did the Tucks feel about kidnapping Winnie? And how can we tell? Oh, kidnapping? Whoa, about to be some crime happen, okay? And then this question down here, what helped everyone to relax? How did the Tucks feel about kidnapping her? And what helped everyone to relax? We'll come back and do our vocab in a minute, okay? Okay, we better read chapter 6. If there's going to be a kidnapping, we better get going, okay? All right, ready? Chapter 6. Afterward, when she thought about it, it seemed to Winnie that the next few minutes were only a blur. First, she was kneeling on the ground, insisting on a drink from the spring. And the next thing she knew, she was seized and swung through the air, open-mouthed, and found herself straddling the bouncing back of the fat old horse, with Miles and Jesse trotting along on either side, while May ran puffing ahead, dragging on the bridle. Okay, they just kidnapped her. Winnie had often been haunted by visions of what it would be like to be kidnapped, but none of her visions had been like this, with her kidnappers just as alarmed as she was herself. She had always pictured a troop of burly men with long black mustaches who would tumble her into a blanket and bear her off like a sack of potatoes while she pleaded for mercy. But instead, it was they, May Tuck and Miles and Jessie, who were pleading. "Please, child, dear, dear child, don't you be scared." This was May, trying to run and call back over her shoulder at the same time. "We wouldn't harm you for the world." "If you'd yelled or anything," this was Jessie, "someone might have heard you, and that's too risky." And Miles said, "We'll explain it soon as we're far enough away." Winnie herself was speechless. She clung to the saddle and gave herself up to the astonishing fact that though her heart was pounding and her backbone felt like a pipe full of cold running water, her head was fiercely calm. Disconnected thoughts presented themselves one by one, as if they had been waiting their turn in line. "So this is what it's like to ride a horse. I was going to run away today anyway. What will they say when I'm not there for breakfast? I wish the toad could see me now. That woman is worried about me. Miles is taller than Jessie. I'd better duck if I don't want this next branch to knock me off." Okay, all of those are just thoughts, random thoughts that she's having in her mind while she's being kidnapped. She's thinking all these different things. Okay, they had come to the edge of the wood now with no sign of slowing their rapid jog. The road, where it angled across the meadow, was just ahead, dazzling white in the open sunlight. And there, standing on the road, was the man from the night before, the man in the yellow suit, his black hat on his head. Discovering him, seeing his surprise, and presented at once with choices, Winnie's mind perversely went blank. Instead of crying out for help, she merely goggled at him as they fled past the spot where he stood. May Tuck was the only one who spoke, and the most she could offer was, "Teaching our little girl how to ride." Only then did it come to Winnie that she ought to shout, wave her arms, do something. But the man had fallen away behind by that time, and she was afraid to let go of the saddle, afraid to turn around, lest she fall off the horse. In another moment it was too late. They had sped up the hill and down its other side, and the opportunity was lost. After another few minutes, the road led them to a place where off to the left, a shallow stream looped near, with willows and sheltering scrubby bushes. "Stop!" cried May. "We'll stop here." Miles and Jessie grabbed at the horse's harness, and he pulled up abruptly, nearly toppling Winnie off over his neck. "Lift the poor child down," May gasped, her chest heaving. "We'll go catch our breath by the water and try to put things straight before we go on." But the explanation, once they had stumbled to the banks of the stream, came hard. May seemed embarrassed, and Miles and Jessie fidgeted, glancing at their mother uneasily. No one knew how to begin. For her part, Winnie, now that the running was over, began to comprehend what was happening, and with the comprehension, her throat closed and her mouth went dry as paper. This was no vision. This was real. Strangers were taking her away. They might do anything. She might never see her mother again. And then, thinking of her mother, she saw herself as small, weak, and helpless, and she began to cry, suddenly crushed as much by outrage as by shock. May Tuck's round face wrinkled in dismay. "Dear Lord, don't cry. Please don't cry, child," she implored. "We're not bad people. Truly we're not. We had to bring you away. You'll see why in a minute, and we'll take you back just as soon as we can. Tomorrow, I promise." When May said tomorrow, Winnie's sobs turned to wails. Tomorrow? It was like being told she would be kept away forever. She wanted to go home, now, at once, rush back to the safety of the fence and her mother's voice from the window. May reached out to her, but she twisted away, her hands over her face, and gave herself up to weeping. "This is awful," said Jessie. "Can't you do something, Ma? The poor little tad." "We ought to have had some better plan than this," said Miles. "That's the truth," said May helplessly. The dear Lord knows there's been time enough to think of one, and it had to happen sooner or later. We been plain bone lucky it hasn't before now, but I never expected it'd be a child." She reached distractedly into the pocket of her skirt and took out the music box, and without thinking, twisted the winding key with trembling fingers. When the tinkling little melody began, Winnie's sobbing slowed. She stood by the stream, her hands still over her face, and listened. Yes, it was the same music she'd heard the night before. Somehow it calmed her. It was like a ribbon tying her to familiar things. She thought, when I get home, I'll tell Granny it wasn't elf music after all. She wiped her face as well as she could with her wet hands and turned to May. "That's the music I heard last night," she managed between recovering sniffles. "When I was out in my yard. My granny said it was elves." "Dear me, no," said May, peering at her hopefully. "It's only my music box. I didn't suppose anyone could hear it." She held it out to Winnie. "Do you want to take a look at it?" "It's pretty," said Winnie, taking the little box and turning it over in her hands. The winding key was still revolving, but more and more slowly. The melody faltered. Another few widely spaced notes plinked, and then it stopped. "Wind it up if you want to," said May, "clockwise." Winnie turned the key. It clicked faintly, and then, after several more turns, the music began to play again, brisk from its fresh winding, and merry. No one who owned a thing like this could be too disagreeable. Winnie examined the painted roses and lilies of the valley and smiled in spite of herself. "It's pretty," she repeated, handing it back to May. The music box had relaxed them all. Miles dragged a handkerchief from a back pocket and mopped at his face, and May sank down heavily on a rock, pulling off the blue straw hat and fanning herself with it. "Look here, Winnie Foster," said Jessie. "We're friends, we really are, but you gotta help us. Come sit down, and we'll try to tell you why." Okay, so the Tucks kidnapped Winnie, but do they sound like bad people? Do they sound like the kind of people that regularly kidnap children? Not really. Let's go to our question in our notes. The question said, how did the Tucks feel about kidnapping Winnie? Let's answer that first. So how did they feel about kidnapping Winnie? I don't think they wanted to. It's almost like they felt like they didn't have a choice. Okay, so let's say they didn't want to. They didn't want to. They felt like they had no choice. They felt like they had no choice. Okay, so they didn't want to kidnap her. Whoops. They didn't want to kidnap her, but they felt like they had no choice. How can we tell that? Well, they apologize quite a bit. And May says, "Please don't cry, please don't cry." And Miles and Jessie say, "We're sorry, but we had to do this, and you'll see why in just a minute." So how do we know, how can we tell? They apologize quite a bit. They apologize a lot. They tell her to stop crying. They say, "Stop crying." I'm going to put that in quotation marks. They say, "Please stop crying." Okay. And they say, "We'll take you back tomorrow." Take you back tomorrow. Okay, so here's my answer. They didn't want to, I can't write today. They didn't want to, and they felt like they had no choice. They apologize a lot. They say, "Stop crying," and they said they'll take her back tomorrow. Okay, that's how I know. So they don't sound like mean, ugly people. They don't sound like people who have ever kidnapped someone before. It's almost as if they're the victims and they didn't have a choice in kidnapping her. They felt like it was something that they had to do. Okay, last question. What helped everyone to relax? What did May have that when she brought it out, it helped everyone to relax? That's right, the music box. The music box. Okay, and Winnie even says, hey, that sounds familiar to me. I heard that last night when I was standing out in my yard. My grandmother said it was elves, but it's the same little melody that I heard, and now I can see it wasn't elves, it's a music box. And so she looks at it, and that helps her to calm down. Okay, so I just wrote right there what helped everyone to relax, the music box. Okay, all right, let's jump back up here to our vocabulary for these chapters. I chose 2 words from not our vocabulary list, but just 2 other words that I thought were good words for us to know from the 2 chapters. Actually have these out of order. I'm going to say the first word that I want you to write down was from page 34, and it's dismay. Dismay, right here. And to be in dismay means that you are frightened, you're scared, something is causing you horror or panic. And this word is describing May when they're kidnapping her. It said that she felt dismay. May felt frightened. May felt frightened? She's the one doing the kidnapping. That tells me something. So May felt frightened. May was scared. May felt horror. She felt panicked. May was in dismay. Okay, so let's write that one down. The second one, this one's actually from the first chapter we read, chapter 5, from page 30, bleak. This was at the end of chapter 5. Bleak means no, I can't read what I wrote, no warmth or kindliness, and you don't feel hopeful, okay? A bleak day would be like a gray day, no sunshine, maybe looks like it might rain. It's just not a very sunshiny day. But a person can have a bleak look on their face, no warmth, no, they're not hopeful about anything. That's how May first looked at Winnie when they first saw her in the woods. It said the look on May's face was bleak, not hopeful. She was scared, and that led to her dismay. Okay, so there's our vocabulary. All right, so we've answered everything on our chapter 5 and 6 notes. Okay. Whenever I started this video, I thought we would go ahead and take a look at this prediction page. But it looks like I want to go ahead and stop today. I don't know how long it took you to make your vocab quiz or to take your vocab quiz, and I don't want you to run out of time for class today. So I think we're going to stop there for today. When we see each other on Monday, I'll be back on Monday, we will do this predicting page. And we will also do together in class this noun hunt. We'll do that together. And then we're also going to go backwards and take a look at this figurative language page. Okay, so on Monday in class, we will finish up everything else in this packet and go ahead and turn it in. And then we'll be ready for chapter 7, and I'll get everything put together for that. Okay, so we are done for today. I hope you enjoyed reading everything this week. I hope you're enjoying the story, loving the story. Hang on to your packet. We'll finish it on Monday, and I'll get your vocab quizzes graded. Okay, everybody have a great day. If there's any time left in class right now, you may read 40 Book Challenge, and I'll see everybody on Monday. Love you guys. See ya. Have a great weekend.